Good day, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar today, where Gimmal and Microsoft are going to discuss migrating to Microsoft 365, how to modernize your ECM system. So today's speaker talking right now is myself, Chris Kaplinger. I'm the President and Chief Strategy Officer of Gimmal. We also have Patrick Wong, Vice President of Product Management for Gimmal, Chris McNulty, Director of Product Marketing for Microsoft 365, and Ian Story, Principal Program Manager for OneDrive and SharePoint. Just quick, a couple housekeeping items here. You'll see a Q&A button on your team, so just know if you want to ask any questions as this goes on, submit your questions through there. We may answer some of them live as the webinar is going on. If not, we'll get to them at the very end during the Q&A session. Probably we'll try to do most of them live, but we may answer some of them actually in the chat as well. The webinar will be recorded and we will send it out between 24 and 48 hours after the webinar. If you have any help, just send us a message and through Teams there and let us know you're having technical difficulties, and we will do our best to get it fixed. All right, and before I get going anymore, hey, Patrick or somebody, just confirm that I'm coming through loud and clear here before I keep going.
You sound great, Chris. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome.
All good.
Sounds fantastic.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get rolling here. So I want to do a couple slides here before I turn it over to my counterparts for the webinar. So just real quick, I want to talk about information governance as a whole and what it really means to us. And we put the scale up here because we look at it as balancing value to the risk of information inside your organization. So if you think about information on the value side, if you have good value data, you can have a better analytics. You can have improved business processes, improved operating efficiency, overall improvement in your data quality, which can help your search, different search products you're using, your information visibility. And when you start adding all this together, really it just leads to increased profits for your organization. On the risk side, you have things like information exposure, spoliation fines, privacy fines from GDPR, CCPA, all those new privacy laws we're getting these days. E-discovery cost, the more information you have, the more it has to be discovered, the higher that cost goes. And then the worst thing that can happen is if you have any type of exposure, as I mentioned first, it harms your reputation. So those are the types of risks that we see. And another thing we think about on information governance here is, you have information governance as a whole, which is really managing all your information versus something like records management that may be just dealing with business records. So, information governance can mean anything from your core records to your email, your chat, and really everything involved in, with collaboration inside your organization. Let the slide build out here. And before I turn it over to everybody else, actually the smart people on the webinar here, I'm going to talk real briefly just about the Gimmal solutions that we have available. So if you start at the bottom left, we have a product called Gimmal Altitude. It allows you to discover, remediate, and classify content in all your corporate data sources. Really, this becomes really important as a first step to doing migration. So it can help you discover, remove rot, which is redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. And ultimately reduce the cost of migration, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about today. You can also just improve your overall data quality and reducing your risk service of all your information out there. Next product we have is document management for SAP. What this really does is reduces the cost of running SAP by storing all your content that's SAP related content inside Microsoft 365. While we're doing this, it really is zero change management for your SAP end users. That becomes a big deal when you're doing things in SAP. It takes a lot of time to train and get SAP up and running, and we can get all that content into Microsoft 365. The SAP users don't even know it. However, all that data then becomes discoverable for your non-SAP users, which is super powerful. Next product here is content governance for SharePoint. Has a couple neat things in it. We have something called drop zones that make it easier to upload and take content. Has a part that allows us facilitation for content movement based on metadata, and to top it off, it all works seamlessly with SharePoint Syntex. Next, Gimmal Migration, which is sort of the topic for the webinar today, so not going to dig into that. I'll let Patrick hit on that a little bit later. But last thing on here is records management, the Gimmal records management product. And as I mentioned earlier, unlike information governance, which typically applies to all your corporate information, records management focuses on business records that must follow a policy for how long you must keep them, and maybe more importantly, how this position works. So are they really destroyed? Are they kept permanently? Are they archived? What really happens to them at the end of their life cycle? And on top of that, with the recent acquisition of Infolinks, the Gimmal just acquired, you may have heard about, we also greatly just improved our physical records management capability. Okay, so next slide here is Microsoft 365 and migrating to Microsoft 365. Before I turn it over to Chris and Ian, just want to mention that there really is a huge return on investment when migrating legacy ECM systems to Microsoft 365. And what's great is once you're up and running, you can really enjoy the simplified technology and lower total cost of ownership. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Ian and Chris and let them talk more about Microsoft 365. And hey, guys, just tell me when I need to switch slides here since I'm controlling.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. And we'll try to be explicit with which Chris, because we have two of you here today. So this is Ian Story, part of the SharePoint and OneDrive team here at Microsoft. And just before we move off of this slide, I'll just reiterate the points that you made about, I was a customer for years and years prior to coming to Microsoft with one stop in between at another ECM provider, and having a whole set of different on-prem legacy ECM systems, that were typically by line of business. Maybe the finance department had FileNet, and the engineering department had Documentum, and the marketing department had SharePoint, and so forth. Maybe that made sense back in the 90s, back in the early 2000s, and so forth. But as organizations have moved to the cloud and tried to standardize and not have all these different silos of information, this ability for you to really centralize all your content, remove all that duplication, all that cost. Think about the servers and the storage and the maintenance fees to the vendors and the support staff to maintain these things and upgrade these things. I can, fondly or not so fondly remember, spending nights and weekends doing these major upgrades of these systems and so forth. So simplifying your technology environment, getting the benefits of Microsoft 365, Azure, and the Power Platform, like you talk about here, just taking advantage of all the capabilities that are provided in the whole suite. You get Office and you get email, but you also get SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams and all those great capabilities that we'll talk more about as we go here. And then likewise, just not just simplifying it for your users, but reducing that cost. I talked earlier about the hardware costs and all the proprietary skills that are needed to maintain all those systems. In many cases, some of these vendors don't even exist anymore. And you've got folks where it's becoming harder and harder to even find folks that know these systems and so on. So moving that to Microsoft 365, we think makes a lot of sense. We've seen a lot of customers do this. And that's a perfect segue to our next slide here, just talking about the momentum that we see in the marketplace. Just last week, we announced a pretty big milestone. So, you can read the slide here, 200 million active monthly users, or what we call monthly active users, or MAU, now using SharePoint as a part of Microsoft 365 in the cloud. That's very significant because it wasn't that long ago that we announced 100 million. It was actually at our last physical Ignite conference. So Ignite in 2019, we announced that we were at 100 million. And so if you think about the service, this service has been around since the late 2000s, the very first versions of SharePoint Online and so forth in that kind of 2008 timeframe. We went from 0 users back in 2008 to at the tail end of 2019, we were at 100 million. And then in the last year, we've gone from 100 million to 200 million monthly active users. And that just speaks to the momentum that's happening here as you see more and more large organizations and small, and government agencies and educational institutions and so forth, realizing that, hey, we can really consolidate and standardize and save money and make a simpler environment for our users and so forth. And there are a lot of examples where maybe we didn't have the feature that you needed, maybe we didn't have the reliability that you needed, maybe some of the regulations needed to change before you were allowed to store some of this content in the cloud. Maybe we had to go get certain certifications, like SEC 17A4, which we now have for Microsoft 365 for those that are in the broker-dealer financial services space. Maybe you needed us to get PCI DSS certified, and we've done that for SharePoint, and so forth. Jump into it, Chris. Yeah.
I'm gonna just observe, for those of you who may be less familiar with kind of the role of SharePoint, Microsoft 365 is definitely a suite of capabilities. And so SharePoint is one of the apps that lives as part of that suite, but SharePoint is also the engine that powers all the other experiences of the suite. And what that means is, in addition to being able to work with content through SharePoint sites and libraries and pages and portals and all that, those same experiences of content and pages, whether I'm getting at them through Teams, through OneDrive, through Planner, through Stream, and the capabilities of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, all of those have SharePoint as the fundamental backend that drives all of those experiences. So we're really encouraged by how much our customers have turned to us with seeing this level of accelerating growth. It's very satisfying to see that years of investments that our engineers have made at building out scaled capacity and compliance capabilities are definitely up to this load and more.
Yep, perfect. So yeah, obviously lots of momentum here, and this slide also mentions the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So let's segue to the next slide here, Chris Kaplinger, and just talk quickly about the Magic Quadrant. So this was published just in November, so this is about a month old, give or take. You can see where Microsoft stands on the Magic Quadrant, the leader in the Leaders Quadrant. That's definitely where we have aspired to be for a long time, and we've made steady progress if you look back over the last few years in the Magic Quadrant, just as we've continued to innovate and to grow our customer base and build more capabilities and get more certifications and so forth. You've seen Microsoft continuing to advance here if you look over the last few years. So, I won't read the quote here, but Gartner had very complimentary things to say. So this isn't a, just believe what Microsoft says on the previous slide and, oh boy, we've got hundreds of millions of users and so forth, but also look at what the leading analysts in the space have to say in terms of Microsoft's market position. And this also is good to think about, as you talk with your CIO or your CTO or your enterprise architecture in your organization, you can really show the evolution of where the content services that Microsoft provides as a part of Office 365 and SharePoint Online and overall that entire Microsoft 365 platform have really become not just part of the suite, but best of breed. We are clearly rated as the #1 vendor here in the Leaders Quadrant for both ability to execute and completeness of vision. And we're excited to work with more and more customers here as you look to consolidate and get more value out of M365, and a great partner to help you do that here with our partners at Gimmal. That's why Chris and I are on the webinar today. So with that, yeah, Chris, why don't you jump in?
One of the things Gartner's called out, just is, as we've seen kind of the, our market grow and that getting recognized by organizations like Gartner, we see it as our responsibility to build a platform that serves our customers as well as helps our partners serve our customers, helps our partners achieve more with them. And so when we think of, partners like Gimmal, who are one of Microsoft's preferred partners for content services, that's a strength that Gartner explicitly calls out in the report. And you can download a copy of this report and read it to your heart's content, is that the system of partners we have that are out there to help you with solutions they've built and solutions they implement is a real strength for the Microsoft 365 platform. And it's something that we're totally stoked at seeing all of the investments and momentum growing in and around Gimmal. Some of the investments and momentum that we're building is related to what you may have heard about previously, Project Cortex. By the way, none of this is reflected in the Gartner rankings because the Gartner rankings were based on the cutoff date before we started releasing Cortex capabilities. Cortex is coming to market as 2 sets of essentially products. Fundamentally, down at the bottom half of the screen, you have SharePoint Syntex. SharePoint Syntex is a set of capabilities that allows people to build no-code AI that captures the way that they read a document, the way that they classify a document into the cloud, teaching the cloud to read content the way that they would, bringing it forward into a processing engine that allows us to automatically recognize information that's coming in, to pull out the key facts, figures, people, locations, and metadata, to automate that entire ingestion process, being able to invoke more with automated workflow and application of security and compliance policy, then carrying it forward into our topics engine, where we take all that enriched information and orchestrate it into topics that we deliver as part of the applications that you use every day throughout Microsoft 365. So we have a lot more information available on Cortex and on Syntex. And if we move to the next slide, Chris. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we were, I'm sorry, my apologies. But we'd love to help you understand how you can use the Cortex investments, make sure to round out your sense of what we're doing at the base platform so that Gimmal can help you move more capabilities into that platform and then empower them even more with the rest of their content management and integration capabilities through it. Having said that, Ian, anything else before we throw it back to Chris and Patrick?
No, you summarized it perfectly, Chris. You know, what we wanted to really make sure folks came away from this with is the platform is growing and growing by leaps and bounds. It's definitely highly rated by the industry analysts, and we continue to really invest here with Project Cortex, both SharePoint Syntex, which is the first offering that's come out of this project, and our forthcoming topics capabilities that you'll hear more about in the not too distant future. So perfect. Let's turn it back over to our colleagues at Gimmal.
Thanks, Ian, Chris. And congratulations on that, by the way, on the Magic Quadrant. This is Patrick here, but I've been watching that Magic Quadrant for several years. So to see you guys, get to that top right-hand corner after so much hard work and really realizing, what it takes to get there, working with the business, the customers, and really getting to that point, definitely huge kudos there, right? And we've been seeing this evolve and M365 evolve over the years. So certainly a lot of kudos to Ian and Chris.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Patrick.
Awesome. On to the topic at hand, onto the Gimmal migration side of things. So obviously, I'll be talking to that today. So my role at Gimmal is VP of Product. So obviously, I've worked a lot on migrations. Right. So working with customers, working with stakeholders to say, this is what you're trying to do, right? Helping them kind of see the return on investment for migration into M365, right? And historically, we've done a heck of a lot of work with, the content servers in the past, the Documentums in the past, and really, those systems are don't want to say anything bad about them because we do a lot of work with them today, and we do support a lot of those types of systems, right? It's just, with a lot of the, in one of the previous slides that we talked about, with the cloud offering of M365 and just where Microsoft is heading with the capabilities and even how Gartner ranks Microsoft today, it's just leaps and bounds, kind of heading into a visionary and really tons of different functionality with the Cortex, and leading in the ECM space, really. Right. So obviously, the topic that we're talking about today is Gimmal migration, right? And really what makes us different in this space is really we have a turnkey end-to-end solution. So Chris Kaplinger on the Gimmal side talked to or alluded to that Gimmal altitude for analysis of what you have, right? So taking the time to say, okay, this is what we have on our file shares. This is what we have on our SharePoint 2016 environment, right? This is what we have on these other systems, right? Kind of doing that end-to-end analysis. So really understanding what you have so that you can actually plan your migrations, right? Plan on how do we actually want to use this information? What do we want to take from this information? What information is important, and maybe what information is redundant or obsolete, right? So having an end-to-end solution where we help you with the analysis up front, right? We certainly have lots of experience on the information governance side of things, right? To say, okay, how do we want to set things up in SharePoint? How do we want to set things up in M365? What is important for our organization, right? Being able to provide tools and services in that space. And obviously turning our attention to Gimmal migration, right? How do we get the data from point A to point B being M365? Right, primarily SharePoint Online, OneDrive, Teams, right? So we'll be focusing on the Gimmal migration side of things on the next couple of slides, and then kind of turning back to that turnkey end-to-end solution, right? Once we got that information in there, right? Obviously Gimmal, well known for records management, right? So records management, what does that mean? The electronic records management. Are we keeping things too long? Are we keeping things just the right amount of time? Are we classifying things the right way? Are we doing automatic classification, right? All of the important topics for records and information management handled by the Gimmal records management product, obviously both electronic and physical. So really looking at it from end to end, it's a turnkey solution, right? Whether it's analysis, whether it's your governance, whether it's your migration, whether it's records management, and the services around that, right? We got you covered, right? So end to end, it's a pervasive argument, right, that we're trying to put out there. Okay, and really Gimmal is uniquely positioned to leverage our knowledge in this space, in the technologies for analysis, migration, and records management, right? Personally, we've done hundreds and hundreds of migrations, right? We're talking about, thousands of terabytes worth of data, right? We've seen customers with, a couple hundred gigabytes to, average of 10 terabytes, right? So we've seen customers that are on the small end and we've seen customers on the large end, and really understanding, the requirements that a customer has to do a migration. What are the common pain points? What are the common issues that they're going to see as part of those migrations? That's really where we will excel with you, right? With our tools, with our experience, with our best practices, we got you covered. Right. And really one of the things I like to talk about is with the Gimmal migration, we enable effective, efficient, and I underline successful migrations, right? Because there's a lot of vendors out there that can do migrations, but what does a successful migration mean to your organization? Right. And that's where we will work with you to say, what does a successful migration look like from, let's say, Documentum or OpenText Content Server, Livelink, to M365. What does that mean, right? So with that being said, what we provide is a best-in-class suite of migration tools for migrating from legacy systems like OpenText, Livelink into SharePoint, right? We'll do things like provide you the analysis so you understand what you have, so you can plan and migrate effectively. Right, we can provide the services, the turnkey services for doing the migration implementation, right, as well as doing your governance or security implementation in M365 as well, right? One of the things that Ian and Chris from Microsoft pointed out is Gimmal is a Microsoft Content Services preferred member, right? And what that means is, in a sense, we have a rubber stamp next to our name in terms of Gimmal as experts in information management, records management, and migrations, so that and that you have comfort knowing that you've come to the right place in terms of that expertise, the tools, the knowledge to get you to where you need to go as an organization. And really, with the examples that we'll be looking at today with the case studies, as well as a very light demo of what your data will look like at the end of the day, right? We're going to use Content Server, so the OpenText platform, as the use case, as the example today, but the same thing goes for systems like Documentum or file shares, right? And to this slide, talking to the points that we have here, right? One of the important points is that we will preserve your records management classifications and policies, right? So if you're using a system like OpenText Content Server / Livelink, right? Whether you're using records classifications there, whether you're using records management module, physical records management module, all of that information can be transferred across as well. So it becomes a what I call a full fidelity migration. You don't lose anything. Everything is preserved, right? So if you had a records management requirement where all of your legal documents are classified according to your legal file plan, right? And you have retention policies applied on those files, right? Obviously, all of that can be transferred along with your migration, right? So if you had a contract, let's say, I had a contract with one customer, customer X, and the records policy and the life cycle on that was to keep it 10 years, right? And that was based on the record creation date of January 1st, say 2009, right? All of that information transfers across as part of the migration into M365 and into Gimmal Records Management, right? So you don't lose any of that information. So that's super powerful. We just wanted to point that out. With our tools, super easy. We've fine-tuned our tools over a number of years, right? Once you install our tools, they are all client-side. So nothing complicated that you have to install on your server-side systems, right? You drop it in, and literally within 5 minutes, like we've done that for some customers, we've dropped in the tools, we've installed them, and within 5 minutes, they're ready to migrate, right? And the look on their eyes, it says a lot, right? How simple the tools can be and how simple the process can be. Right. And then touching on that last point there is migration of electronic and physical records, right? Not just your electronic documents. We can actually pull all of your physical records from a system like the Livelinks of the world and migrate that over directly into Gimmal Records Management and the Gimmal Physical Records Management product. Awesome. On to the next slide, please, Chris. Awesome. So the example I wanted to cover today for our actual hands-on demonstration and discussion is OpenText Content Server. So it's probably funny to hear, but migrations give me goosebumps, right? I've done lots of them, right? We're passionate.
Sorry, I had to laugh on that one.
but it's the truth. It's the truth, right? We care about what we do, right? So migrations give me goosebumps, right? We're passionate. We're excited about helping organizations become more efficient and realize the modern information and records management functionality in M365, both out of the box and with Gimmal Records Management, right? And personally, I've done lots and lots of these migrations. So firsthand, I've seen what success looks like. I've seen what it takes to get a customer from point A and point B. And really, it's actually not that complicated, right? And we've seen lots of examples where customers migrate over and the return on investment they see within the first year, it's quite amazing, right? A lot of happy customers, right? Case studies, that we've done and looked at, a lot of government customers, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, water services and utilities, engineering firms, airports, banks, major banks, oil and gas, lots of Fortune 500 companies, right? We've been there, we've done that, we've helped them avoid reinventing the migration wheel, right? One example, National Institute of Health from a couple of years ago, we did the migration for them, right? Nothing was missed, even down to their links, right? All their document links redirected to SharePoint, right? Super powerful, right? And that's why I kind of go back to the goosebumps and the passion around the migration, right? Because we can see how powerful it can be, right, for the end customer, right? When they get to that final end state, they're in M365, they have their data in one place, right? And really what we're talking about in this example is a common narrative that we're seeing, right? That may resonate with some of the organizations on the call today, right? And in this example that we're looking at, maybe you've been using something like OpenText for a number of years. You have lots of data, right? 10 years worth of data, for example. You've gone through many upgrades. So maybe you've upgraded from, say, Livelink 9.0 7.1, you went to 10, then you went to 10.5, but instead of going to 16, content server 16 or content server 20, maybe your organization's looking at it from the perspective of, let's get onto one platform, right? We have M365, right? We're doing some SharePoint Online already. We're using Teams, right? Let's take that step, right? Let's migrate everything over from our OpenText Livelink or content server environment. Right, so you've gone through the work of many upgrades. You've gone through years of churn on how data was used and how the system was used within your organization. Right, there's lots of issues with the permissions and how you've been managing that within content server over the years. People have left groups, changed teams. Right, people maybe didn't use it properly for certain times, and really one of the things that we see that may resonate with a lot of our customers out there is that it's hard to support. Right, finding people who really know content server, and our team knows content server really well. It's really hard to find guys who really can assist with the next generation of how those vendors want you to use those tools, right? And it kind of ties back to the magic quadrant around what does that mean? Are they a visionary? Are they a leader in the ECM space, or are they kind of falling behind? Is there a good cloud offering? Right, and really some of those solutions are getting to end of life, right, where maybe at one time it was the right tool set for your organization, right? And some of the companies that we work with and support today, it is still the right tool set, but with changing technologies for a lot of our customers, it's no longer the case, right? And we can attest to that, working with customers on both sides of the fence, on customers who are thinking of migrating to M365 and customers who may not be ready yet, right? But really, systems that are out of date or duplicate functionality can be decommissioned and rationalized. And rationalize is a good word for it, because rationalizing your systems will help you realize substantial cost savings, right? I've been there, I've done that, right? I've been in there doing the business cases with the customers, right? We've been doing statement of works, whatnot, and we do see that return on investment, right? It's a very pervasive argument. Some of the common migration drivers, right, based on what we're seeing here, is cost and complexity of OpenText. We have things like high annual maintenance cost, expensive and difficult to find professional resources. I kind of alluded to earlier, the cloud offering for some of our of Microsoft's competitors in this space is not strong, right? And supporting similar ECM platforms duplicates your IT department's cost and complexity. Right, you're having a team that maybe supports your Office 365, your M365, and the Power Platform, and then you have a different team that supports your OpenText platform and the workflows within Livelink and Content Server, right? And I can't stress enough the effort around costly upgrade projects that are required every few years, right? And we do have customers today that we support at Gimmal, where we are doing these upgrades for them, right? Where we need to get from 10.5 content server 10.5 to 16, and we do that, right? And we know what the cost is, and we know how complicated it is, and really, the amount of effort to upgrade. You can take that cost of your upgrade and use it towards your migration, and really, the ROI, is achieved within less than the cost of the actual upgrade, right? So, a lot to talk about there, right? So again, we're super passionate about that. Our job at Gimmal is to help you avoid reinventing the migration wheel, right? It's turnkey, end to end, with planning, the tools, the services, support, RM implementation, governance. We got you covered. And on the OpenText side, right, there's obviously a lot of complexity there, right? Custom modules, specific configurations, right? We have the experience to support you on that, right? Whether you need someone to understand what you have configured there or how to make it work in M365, that's where one of our key differentiators are, right? Being able to help you understand what data you have and how to migrate it, right? So in terms of migrations, we've done lots and lots of migrations from Content Server to SharePoint, whether that's SharePoint on-prem or more likely these days, SharePoint Online. Lots of experience, best in class, I would say. Okay, Chris, next slide. And really, I wanted to summarize at a high level, and probably resonating with a lot of the customers on the call, what organizations struggle to do when they look at migrations, right? And using that example that we talked about before with OpenText, right? An organization looking to migrate from legacy ECM systems to M365 are faced with a set of oftentimes complex tasks, right? And really, I have a simple Venn diagram I like to use, right? Where we kind of show there's different functionality within legacy ECM systems like an OpenText, right? Where you have things like forms, right? You have projects, metadata, whether it's cloud enabled, external sharing, document management, right? Whether that's just basic versioning, check in, check out, right? Auditing, records management, right? And I threw in the good old DoD 5015.2, right? So some customers, are very interested in maintaining that, right? So the records management side of things, whether or not it's DoD or not certified, right? Records management is an important requirement we see with a lot of customers. Obviously, with ECM systems, you have application integration points, right? You have leading applications where, there's maybe an SAP behind the scenes that's, or in front that's storing, that is surfacing your information, but behind the scenes, the application, the legacy ECM is storing the actual data, the records themselves, right? And obviously, with a lot of these legacy platforms, there's collaboration features, right, that allow you to do things like share information, right, publish information. There's the email integrations of the world, things like business process automation and workflow. And lastly, the legacy imaging, right? Whether it's accounts receivable or land contracts, for example, in the case of, oil and gas company, right? So really what we see in that Venn diagram is we have, legacy ECM, we have SharePoint Online, and we have common functionality, right? And oftentimes that common functionality is quite overlapping, right? And what we show here is our Gimmal migration tools and services will put you on a migration path to get you from that legacy ECM effectively and efficiently into SharePoint Online, right? So our solution at Gimmal is to simplify your complex migrations and support you for success, making your migrations manageable, fast, effective, and efficient with our Gimmal migration tools, right? At a high level, I can talk to that a little bit more in depth. And one of the slides, I'll jump out of the slides in just a moment here after I kind of go through this. And we're actually going to look at what your data will look like at the end of the day in M365, just to make it a little bit more interactive of a discussion today, right? So really, with our high-level capabilities with Gimmal migration, we will do a discovery and analytics on your content server environment, for example. We'll get you your sizing, your ROT, your planning analysis, so you can plan out your migration. So you know how long it's going to take, what it's going to take, which groups to do in which tranches, for example. We do full fidelity migration. That means your dates, users, metadata, everything is preserved. We'll have logs, validation, all the way through, right, to prove that your migration was successful. Right, we will support all common object types from legacy systems like Content Server. We'll do things like auto-correct invalid characters or incompatibilities in M365. In terms of other features there, obviously we will help you restructure long paths. We'll do metadata mapping, injections, help you with your records management metadata, and preserve permissions if you need it. And lastly, one of the key points is hitting on your legacy document links, right? We will actually redirect your legacy document links from a system like OpenText Content Server into SharePoint Online, so that when you decommission that system, all of your links will take you to the right place.
Hey, Patrick, it's Ian. I want to jump in really quick. I know you got to have time for the demo here, but there was a question about mapping security permissions and so forth and preserving those. So you just did touch on it, but just to reiterate that you do map permissions. There may not be exactly the same permissions between the source system and the target system, whether that's, a legacy ECM system or a file share or what have you in terms of the source. but you do a mapping process essentially to make sure that, hey, if you had access to this document in the old system, you'll have access in the new system. If you had the ability to edit it or just view it or what have you in the old, you'll have that same access in the new. Correct?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
You hit the nail on the head, Ian. So that's usually part of our migration best practices, right? So we will usually kind of review that with a customer and provide those best practices. If the customer wants to bring over the permissions like for like, we will do that, right?
Yep. Perfect. Okay.
Awesome.
Keep going.
Okay, awesome. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes showing you the end result of what a migration looks like. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know, Chris, if you're able to share that out.
Yep, we see it.
Awesome. So what I have here is side by side OpenText Content Server with SharePoint Online. Right, and obviously we don't have time to go through the full details of a migration, but what I'm showing you here is a full fidelity migration that I had queued up from earlier today, right? You see here all the dates are the same, right? All the user information is the same, all the documents, right? We have 1, 2, 3 documents here. These are the same 3 documents. These are the same 4 containers. All of that information remains the same. I go into this folder here, right? All our documents are the same. Right? If we look at versioning, so let me expand this window a little bit more. If we look at the versioning, all your versions are here as well. So we have 3 versions here, right? And if we look at this document in Content Server, go take a look at the versions. We have the same 3 versions. So really, it is 100% full fidelity migration as if it was always in SharePoint, right? That's important, right? Everything remains the same as if it was always in SharePoint, down to the user information, down to the metadata that you had, right? So if I go into version tests, we go take a quick look here, right? We have 5 versions on this document, and within Content Server, we also have the same 5 versions, right? Whether that's major, minor versioning, or whether that's just major versioning, right? Again, I didn't want to spend too much time on looking at this, right? We can always schedule a follow-on for that sort of demo, right? But I wanted to show you how powerful that is, right? At the end of the day, your data is exactly as it was in Content Server, right? Everything is preserved, right? All of your dates, all of your user information. Awesome. I think we had one final slide before we wanted to switch to Q&A. Chris, are you able to reshare that final slide?
Working on it.
Awesome. I just want to quickly highlight one case study that we've recently published, and that's for a hotel company in the US, right? And what did we do there? Right, and you know, some of the highlights, right? So we work closely with this company, Stonebridge, right? And they were using Content Server, OpenText Content Server for probably over 10 years, right? Lots and lots of data, right? Whether that was finance, legal, information services, all that sort of data, right? We worked with them to reduce their costs by decommissioning their legacy OpenText system, right? While improving the user experience for their employees, right? So that organization is able to use Teams now, right? Within M365, right? They're really collaborating on their content today, right? And the challenge was, you know, with that old system, it just wasn't meeting their needs, right? And they had 10 years worth of data, right? And not a lot of knowledge to support that system anymore. Right, and working with us, M365 was the answer. And the biggest hurdle for them was extracting the content and metadata from Content Server to SharePoint with full fidelity. And we were able to do that, right? We gave them the SharePoint configuration and best practices for governance. And at the end of the day, they were able to achieve efficient migration and cost savings by removing that legacy system, right? And I can't stress that enough, is that it was a pretty straightforward project, right? And within a couple of months, they were off that old system, and the return on investment, you know, the savings they got on reducing the support and the overall IT infrastructure and the hardware infrastructure, you know, gold stars is what we got there. Awesome. that's what I had prepared for the slides today. Chris, over to you.
Yep, I think that's it, and we're going to jump into Q&A. And I'm going to admit I'm not totally familiar with the platform here, so
we've got 3 questions that have come in that we've one of which we've answered, 2 of which actually we've answered. One was around preserving existing security permissions for migrations, whether that's shared drives or other sources to M365. Right. We talked about that briefly. The second one is, and this is a good one for everyone to chime in on, are there character limitations in Microsoft 365, like in the Windows file system, 255, 218? What's your approach to remediation? So I will note that Microsoft 365, you can have up to 400 characters, and that's the entire path, including the name of the site and everything when you do the migration across. And Patrick, you should speak to what you do if you find during the initial scan that folks had files and folders that are too long. I presume you do basically a remediation to help the users rename and shortcut and that type of thing. So maybe you can speak to a little more about what you do when you run into that.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, thanks for that, Ian. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That is a common thing that we see. So that 400 character limit that Ian talked about, right? We do see it on every migration, right? The good thing is we help you with our tools up front. We will always tell you way in advance. I talked about the discovery process, right? The discovery process for something like, say, OpenText Content Server. We will actually scan those migration areas and we'll tell you where those documents and folder names are going to be too long in advance of your migration, right? So way in advance, so that you can, the customer can go back to the business and say, hey, these are going to be an issue when we do the migration. Do you want to let the migration team deal with it, or do you want to have the business deal with it, right? Now, our tools will also enable you to deal with it, right? We have some secret sauce type things in there, right? Where you can click a button and our tool will automatically make it work, right? In terms of those path links. Usually the best practice is working the migration analyst working with the business to make those judgment calls to say, okay, this is where it makes sense to, maybe we don't migrate it to this really long library name. Maybe we just use the shortened library name, right? So there's a lot of best practices that we can provide and give guidance on, right? And there's never been an issue where we've run into a customer where they've got hung up on those limitations. We've always found really solid ways to get around it or to make their data work with those limitations, right? Perfect. Oftentimes it's just shortening paths where it makes sense.
Yep, or reorganizing a bit. Maybe you've got a path that's super long and you move the folder up a couple levels and that helps you shorten the path and so forth. We see that commonly in lots of these types of migrations. Next question that was in the thread here is, how do you map categories and attributes, cats and ats, to SharePoint columns? Patrick, how do you handle more of the metadata and so forth from the source ECM system?
Oh yeah, no, that's a great question, and that is handled very easily by our tools. So again, with the analysis side, we'll tell you way in advance what kind of categories you have, what kind of attributes, how often they're applied to your content, right? So that hey, these categories attributes are probably going to be important because they're applied to, say, 90% of my content. Whereas if it's only applied to one of my documents, it's probably not going to be important for me to maintain in SharePoint, right? But our tools will allow you to map those categories and attributes over to content types or columns in SharePoint, right? And you can use managed metadata, terms, whatever you like there, right? It's super powerful. Let's say your categories and attributes are, used globally within your organization. You only have to map it over one time within our tools, and we will preserve that mapping for all of your migrations, right? Or let's say your data is specific and you need to map the categories attributes for, say, finance, which is going to be different from your other content stores, right? You can map it on a department level basis, right? It's very easy to do. It's super powerful, and you can inject data as well, right? It doesn't have to be, the data as is. You can actually inject the data or modify the data as part of your migration, right? So there's a lot of capability and power on there.
Awesome. There was another question kind of related to that I think you answered. a question maybe that Chris will want to jump in on, both Chris's actually. Is there any interplay with your product and Microsoft Information Protection or Azure Information Protection? How do you, kind of do that, secure the content, lock it down a little more, and so forth?
Yeah, Ian, this is Chris Kaplinger, the Gimmal Chris.
Yep.
And so, I'll jump in on that when Lisa starts. So really, the first thing is we get asked that a lot, and our first answer is we work just fine with MIP or AIP. So the purpose there is that it usually is to lock content, it's to encrypt content. I think people also use it to even put headers and footers and watermarks and things like that on content as well. The Gimmal product doesn't do that. We rely on the Microsoft product for all of that. So we, that's sort of our line. We say, okay, that's sort of Microsoft's territory. However, those classifications are typically done. A lot of times people just see content in Outlook, for example, and they'll mark it classified. And when they mark it classified, things happen to it. We are working on using those same classifications to also do other things not related to information protection. We're not doing it yet, but it is on the roadmap and something we're looking at how to best do that.
Yep, and you can imagine you might apply those at the site level or something like that, and then any other content that you move into the site would get classified that way and so forth. So perfect.
Exactly.
All right, there was another question about.
From
go ahead, Chris. Yep.
Microsoft's perspective, we have with Syntex, we have the ability to automatically look at content as it lands in our system, whether it's through migration or someone's creating it or uploading it, and use models to automatically invoke labels. And so for folks who are less familiar with it, just to recap, labels are an attribute of Microsoft 365. They're tags with superpowers. And we have one class of labels for sensitivity that we get from MIP, where we invoke things like encryption and access control, and other around retention and records management. And so that base tooling is how we enforce it. Gimmal can, and Chris can speak in much more eloquent detail about the much more powerful and subtle ways that Gimmal is able to invoke and manage records throughout Microsoft 365 and beyond. But that baseline capability of setting an MIP label is something that you can invoke with Syntex for content alongside the content that you're bringing in through Gimmal Migration.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. All right, one other question and reminder, you can put your questions in the chat, but we've got time for at least this one. Do you have experience migrating from previous versions of SharePoint to SharePoint Online? What's the difference in the Gimmal migration tools versus the Microsoft tools for SharePoint specifically? So I'll quickly just highlight Microsoft does provide a tool called the SharePoint Migration Tool. We commonly refer to it as SPMT, SharePoint Migration Tool. It supports SharePoint Server 2010, 2013, and 2016. Also works with local file shares to migrate your content from those sources into Microsoft 365. Traditionally that tool is used, for very large migrations of file share data, and also for fairly straightforward migrations of content in on-premises SharePoint. You do oftentimes get into the situation where you have more advanced things in the on-prem version of SharePoint, lots of real customizations that you've done, maybe third-party workflow tools that you're using, et cetera, that requires more advanced support than what we do with the SharePoint migration tool. And maybe Chris and Patrick from the Gimmal side, you can speak to anything that you do in that space, or maybe you say, hey, we're focused on the traditional ECM providers and maybe not so much those SharePoint migrations.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Ian. So although we have done some SharePoint to SharePoint Online, right? But yeah, we focus more on the traditional, the OpenText Content Server, the Documentums of the world, right? But if a customer that we're working with has that requirement, obviously we'll help them out where we can, right? With some of our tools that can do that. Obviously, the SPMT, SharePoint Migration Tool from Microsoft, can do a lot of that as well, right?
Yep, and we certainly have other partners there. You can reach out to me directly. My email's there on the slide if you have questions about other partners that can help with on-prem SharePoint migrations to the cloud. We would point you to our SharePoint migration tool. First of all, of course, it's included with your M365 license and so on. But if that didn't work, we certainly have others that we can help you with too. All right, so we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I'm looking here to see if there's any that we haven't answered yet. But if you have one last one, anybody out there listening, get it submitted here.
I think Julio Cruz has that one there.
About size. Yep.
I can handle that one. So that is a very good question, Julio. So the size of the migration and the timing, it really depends on many factors, right? Obviously, if the customer says, "Hey, I need to get off this in 3 months," no matter what, right? Then we kind of work backwards from that, right? So it comes down to the will of the organization and how quickly they want to get off. Oftentimes there are limitations around, maybe, your OpenText environment or your Documentum environment is unhealthy, right? And then there's limitations around, how quick we can get the content off because, there's just other factors at play, right? Obviously, we work with customers to remediate those types of issues and stabilize those environments, right? But really, 10 terabytes, it will really range on in terms of how many people are working on that, right? How many people are assigned, and then really even down to how much rigor do you want to spend on your migrations, right? And in terms of rigor, I'm talking about, what the change management is, right? Are we doing, a red carpet for every department group, or is it more of a lift and shift, right? So really, 10 terabytes, the time range can vary quite drastically, but yeah, it's conceivable you can get it done in a couple of months, right?
Yep. And for the more basic migrations, if you're just doing a simple file share migration or something like that, we have some customers that have done 10 terabytes in a day, but it's rare because, again, the source system that you're extracting it from has to support ripping out that much content that quickly and loading it. And as Patrick noted, there's all the change management and so forth. It's rare that on the Microsoft side, where the bottleneck, it's more the training, the education, the change management, the planning, the communication, and then the actual extraction of the data and pulling it across. So, yep. So I think we're basically out of time. There were a couple questions we didn't get to in the chat about homegrown ECM systems and those migrations, and how we philosophically do these in a phased approach or in a big bang, or what the best practices are. We'll try to follow up on those. So if you had questions that didn't get answered, please reach out via email here. And Chris and Patrick, any last words from the Gimmal side?
Yeah, nothing here. I just want to say thanks for everybody for attending today. Ian and Chris, Microsoft Chris, thank you for joining on us today. I think it was great to have you here along with us.
Yeah, thank you for being a great partner, and we appreciate the chance to present with you today. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.